I kept a list in my head that I never wrote down. Nightlights that blinked at odd hours on our street in Everett, Washington. Shoelaces left damp near the door when he swore he had taken the car. A nick on his knuckle that looked too neat for clumsiness. I stacked these details like tiles, pressing each into the mortar of caution, telling myself I was building nothing. Tonight the stack pressed back. My husband, Ethan, left at 12:17 a.m. with the same careful quiet he used when he didn't want to wake me. I remained on the edge of the mattress and counted my heartbeats until the garage door settled and the sound flattened. The house stayed alert without him, every surface sharper. I walked the rooms like a night guard, spotting changes I had never named before. The shelf where he kept a slim black bag, the desk with its locked second drawer, the phone charger that remained empty. I held my breath and timed his absence, measuring it against the rhythm of the neighborhood, the single car that passed, the distant train that always came late. When the front camera pinged, I checked and saw nothing but our steps, our mat, our quiet porch. The absence was louder than noise. I decided I would not lie still this time. The list became a map. If something was wrong, it would show itself tonight. I promised myself I would follow only far enough to confirm I was wrong and come home to sleep beside the same man and his same morning routine. I took my keys, my phone, and the slim flashlight from the junk drawer, and I stepped into the hallway that divided our lives into before and after.
Ethan liked order. He liked containers labeled, passwords rotated, socks folded the same way, groceries sorted by load-bearing weight. He liked systems that held without squeaking. When he said he worked late, his late meant exactly 2 hours, never 1 minute more or less. When he meal prepped Sunday, each container aligned into a neat grid. His order steadied me. I shaped myself around it and used it as certainty. The first time the order flickered, nothing seemed dramatic. He came home at 3 a.m. and showered before he kissed my cheek. I pretended to sleep. The second time, he wore a different belt. The third time, he leaned on the staircase as if catching breath after a sprint he would not admit to. I logged these details as routine could tolerate them. I kept the house humming. I kept my own job steady. I kept my questions locked like that second desk drawer. I told myself he was solving a temporary problem for someone else because he liked solving problems, because he hated chaos. Still, he moved at night with a rhythm not born from spreadsheets or client calls. He returned carrying air that felt charged, like the pause between a thought and an action. I could frame this as kindness or secrecy. I chose kindness until tonight. I had given order its chance to fix whatever cracked inside him. Order failed. I would replace it with observation.
I backed the car down the driveway with the lights off until the street opened and then switched them on, settling the beam low. He had turned right. I turned right. The city past midnight had its own hierarchy. Trucks that owned the road, teenagers who floated from parking lot to parking lot, the insomniacs who kept gas stations alive. I trailed him 2 turns behind, far enough to pretend I belonged to another destination. He didn't drive fast, he drove precise. He signaled to empty intersections, paused to an exact count at stop signs, taking routes that avoided main arteries without looking like avoidance. I mirrored him with the soft lag mapping the pattern. Service roads, a cut through an industrial zone, a stretch of storage facilities with metal doors that wore serial numbers like name tags. He parked with his headlights on for a beat, then off, then on again. A code. A reply flashed from somewhere down the row, a brief burst from a windowless sedan. He pulled into a space near a unit with a blue padlock and disappeared into the mouth of the corridor. I parked behind a dumpster and cut the engine. The air in the car went still, and the fabric of the seat under my thighs became too solid. I waited for movement that would explain everything. Something clinked like a tool meeting a latch. A door rolled high enough to swallow a person. A glow spilled against the concrete for a moment and then narrowed. I stepped out and kept to the shadows cast by the units themselves. The corridor held the kind of silence that listens back. My phone camera caught only a strip of light at floor level. I crouched, angling for a glimpse I could rename as innocent. A figure crossed the glow inside the unit, tall, shoulders familiar, wearing a dark hoodie he didn't own at home. He moved with steady purpose. He wasn't looking at a spreadsheet.
I approached the unit from the side where the concrete wall met the roll-up door. I pressed my ear to the seam and heard a zipper rasp and paper slide. I smelled nothing I could identify, nothing to anchor memory, only the metallic bite of storage corridors. I lowered until my eye aligned with a gap in the rubber skirt near the floor. The view was a slit that showed shoes and ankles and the shadow of a table. I recognized Ethan's shoes. Clean soles, faint speck on the left heel from a stain he could never scrub out. Another set of shoes paced near him, bulkier, planted like a person who expected impact. A third pair braced at the doorway, sneaker toes pointing outward like someone guarding a threshold. Ethan's voice did not reach me, but his hands did. I watched his fingers separate stacks of something into neat piles, motion smooth, unhurried, as if counting mattered. He checked each stack's edges, squared them, tapped them into alignment. He passed them to the bulky shoes, who slid them into a duffel. The sneaker toes did not move. A phone vibrated, screen glowing against metal, and someone's wrist shifted to silence it. Ethan lifted a small case and clipped it shut. He balanced it on his palm and weighed it like a fruit at a market stall. He looked at it with a focus he reserved for certain tasks at home, assembling a shelf, fixing a hinge, measuring a frame. The duffel closed. An elbow bumped a metal shelf and a small item rolled, fetching a soft scrape. The bulky shoes pinned it, picked it up, pocketed it. The light cut. The door came down by degrees. I backed away just before the bottom lip striped my shoes with shadow. The lock clicked. The sneaker toes pivoted. I pressed myself into the spill of darkness between units and felt the corridor shrink to a narrow throat. 3 figures emerged and split like practiced water, one toward the sedan, one toward the back exit, one toward Ethan's car. I waited for footsteps to fade, then counted to 50, then to 100. I approached the blue lock and held my breath, listening to the echo of my own blood. I didn't touch the lock. I took photos of the unit number, the scuffs near the handle, the thin black skid that matched the shape of a case dragged sideways. I photographed the parking oil stains, the cigarette butt near the drain, the sticker frayed at the corner where a company logo once lived. I recorded a voice memo with the time and the plate numbers of the sedan and Ethan's car, the precise minute the duffel zipped, the subtle hitch in Ethan's stance when he weighed the case. Data calmed me without explaining anything. It promised clarity later. Right now, it gave me something to hold. I reversed my route to the car and sat without starting it. My breath made fog on the glass that I wiped away with my sleeve and then regretted because it erased the fine smear that might have belonged to the previous owner, an irrelevant fingerprint that still felt like a narrative strand I shouldn't break. I forced myself back to function and pulled out. Ethan took the long exit, as if testing whether anyone followed. I let 2 trucks roll between us. He swung onto a road lined with small businesses that closed early and opened late. He stopped at a strip mall where one light burned above a door with a bell that never rang. He slipped inside and came out 3 minutes later without the hoodie. He took a new route home, slower, calmer, as if completing a loop that could now vanish. I arrived 5 minutes after him. His shoes were by the door in their usual angle. The damp laces had dried. The black bag sat on the shelf where he always kept it. The second desk drawer remained locked. He was in the kitchen, rearranging the dish rack into precise symmetry. He smiled at me, like a man who had cleaned up after himself. I aligned my smile with his and let it hold the weight of my observations. He asked nothing because he wanted nothing to deflect. I asked nothing because I needed better proof. The next day stacked ordinary moments into a convincing structure. Coffee measured, lids placed, counters wiped. Ethan left for work at his usual time. I followed with a plan. I would not intercept his day, I would map his night.
I used my lunch break to visit the storage facility and inquired about a unit for seasonal furniture. The clerk slid a folder across to me and explained sizes with a pleasant rhythm. I glanced behind her at a wall of security monitors. Camera feeds showed corridors, gates, entrances. A small sign near the monitors offered a number for law enforcement inquiries. I memorized it. I paid for a month on a unit 3 doors down from the blue lock and took a tour. The corridor smelled like the inside of an aluminum can. My new unit's door rolled up reluctantly. I snapped photos and measured distances and steps. 2 from my threshold to the blue lock's unit, 18 from there to the side exit, 10 to the utility closet. In the corner, a small grate hummed. I traced the hum to an access panel with a loose screw. I pocketed the screw out of reflex and scolded myself for tampering without purpose. I checked my watch and imagined Ethan at his desk. Email organized into folders, a lunch arranged by macronutrients. I reminded myself I wasn't solving hunger, I was drawing a map. At home, I opened the locked second drawer with a spare key I had made months ago and promised myself never to use. The promise had expired. The drawer held neat rows of nothing. Cables bound with Velcro, a stapler, a box of business cards, a notebook with no label. I opened it to find pages of dates and numbers that could be grocery lists except for the codes in the margins. Letters marked by pairs, A2, B3, C1, times down to the minute. Notes like confirm custody and hold until cleared. Not the language of errands. I took photos of each page and set the notebook back precisely. I closed the drawer and observed the stillness of the room, the way it kept the secret without effort. I prepared a test for the night. If he left again, I would follow closer. If he didn't, I would stage a small disruption and measure the response. He ate dinner in the calm way he always did, forkfuls considered, napkin folded and refolded, plate rotated to keep the pattern tidy. My chest vibrated with the old instinct to smooth everything. To be so easy, no one would look behind me. I let the instinct pass. At 10:54 p.m., he took out the trash, then returned with his phone in his hand and his face unreadable. At 12:09 a.m., he stood and stretched and said he needed an early morning. He liked to front-load the week. He liked to get ahead. He placed a kiss on my forehead as if setting a coin on a rail. I listened as he left, then counted to 200 and followed. He drove a different route, cutting toward a waterfront where loading docks created a grid of shadows. He parked near a warehouse with a door that was not a door until you saw the seam. He approached with a casual step and pressed his palm to a panel I hadn't noticed before. The seam widened. He slipped inside. I felt the city tighten around us, a rubber band stretched twice. I slid out of my car, cut across an empty lot, and tucked behind a stack of pallets. My flashlight stayed in my pocket. The door opened twice more, releasing 2 men who moved like they belonged to the floor. They carried cases that matched the one I had seen him weigh. Inside the warehouse, a forklift beeped. A chain clattered. The men vanished around a corner with a silent shorthand. I crept closer, hugging the line where wall met ground. The seam door was not fully closed. It breathed a fraction. I pressed my fingertips into the crack and felt the thinnest draft of cooler air, a faint vibration through metal like the echo of machines. I listened until my calves burned and my knees complained. Then the forklift beeped again, closer. I retreated to the pallets, watching the exit for shape. Ethan emerged with a backpack and a soft swagger I didn't recognize. Not a celebration, not a panic. Completion. He scanned the lot without moving his head. He had learned something new about nights. I decided to break the pattern without announcing myself. I returned home ahead of him, set my phone on the counter, and opened the black bag on the shelf. Inside, I found a set of gloves, a small flashlight, better than mine, and a thin loop of plastic with an embedded chip. The loop looked like a wristband from a place that controlled access. I slid it back exactly the way I found it. Then I removed his key ring from the dish and photographed each key with a coin for scale. I placed the keys back and waited at the table, spine straight, mind rehearsing neutrality. He walked in at 1:48 a.m. and moved around me like a person who has received news you haven't. He took the black bag to the office, then returned without it. He washed his hands in short, efficient strokes. The water ran clear. His knuckles were unmarked. He placed his phone face down and began to wipe the counter with the corner of a dish towel. The motion was too careful to be casual. I asked him if everything was okay, in the way a person asks whether a car needs gas when both know it doesn't. He said yes, with the soft authority he used to plug leaks in conversations. He went to bed. I remained at the table and scrolled through the photos of keys until I found one familiar, not because I had seen it before, but because it fit the shape of something inside the storage unit. A small square profile, a notch like a bite, a storage lock twin. I rested the phone on my thigh and felt a new layer of the night settle. I wasn't going to sleep. I wasn't going to wait until morning to peel back the next label. I took my spare storage key, my flashlight, a roll of tape, and left.
Back at the storage facility, the gate accepted my code and the cameras watched me without blinking. I lifted my unit's door and pretended to rearrange nothing for the benefit of any guard who might scroll past the feeds. Then I slid along the corridor until I reached the blue lock. I pressed my ear to cold metal and held still. No movement. I used the roll of tape to mount my phone low to the floor with the lens pointing at the seam beneath the lock. I set the camera to record and the flash to off. I whispered the timestamp into the mic, not because I needed to hear my own voice, but to anchor action to accountability. I retreated to my unit, pulled the door down until only a sliver of air remained, and crouched on the concrete with my knees to my chest. The minutes stretched. I counted them by the throbbing in my ankles. The facility at night had its own ritual, the hum of a transformer somewhere out of sight, the far click of a gate, the small scurry of something that had found a home behind insulation. I pictured the monitors at the front desk and how my posture would look from a grainy overhead angle. I imagined the clerk's eyes glazing over as my stillness certified my harmlessness. At 2:37 a.m., a shoe scuffed near the blue lock. I held my breath, without planning. The lock clicked, and the door rolled up just enough to admit a person. The camera captured only shin and knee, then thigh, then hand. The hand wore a glove. The figure disappeared inside. The door remained open a slice. A tiny light blinked within, not a flashlight, something smaller, like a device checking in with the system. A soft scrape, a zipper, a thunk. A second figure entered and passed something small to the first. The tiny light blinked twice, faster, then paused. At 2:41, the door closed and the lock clicked. The corridor air returned to uniform. I retrieved my phone with fingers that felt both numb and too alive. The footage showed nothing definitive except coordination and confidence, and the kind of rhythm that doesn't belong to a spontaneous hobby. I saved it, copied it, sent it to a cloud, and labeled it with the time and the unit number. My lungs finally demanded air, and I gave them steady intake and equal release. I didn't know what I expected to feel. Validation was not relief. It was a corridor with more doors.
The next day, I decided to occupy the same spaces Ethan did without announcing my presence. I drove to the waterfront and parked in the lot where I had watched him slip through the seam door. I walked the perimeter as a person checking out a rental venue might, phone out, camera up, pretending to weigh angles. A security truck rolled by slowly, driver's gaze neither curious nor welcoming. I waved like a resident who wanted to stay a resident. He moved on. Near the seam door, I found a small scuff line at hip height, a place where a belt or case had brushed the metal repeatedly. I photographed it and moved on, circling until I found a second door with a similar seam. I leaned against the wall and listened to the building. It made no promises. I checked my phone and scrolled through Ethan's notebook photos again, focusing on the note that said, "Confirm custody." That word spoke to more than delivery. It suggested chain, ownership, transfer. It suggested someone would miss something if it didn't arrive. I recognized the shape of what I was circling without wanting to name it. I hated the word that held it. I tried to smother the word with logistics. Logistics were safer. Logistics could be color-coded and assigned. Logistics didn't stare at you with a pulse. I set the word aside like a sharp tool I could not hold yet. I returned home by an indirect route, checking my mirrors, not for dramatics, but for data. No one followed me. Still, the house felt like a stage when I walked in, as if furniture had been pulled an inch forward. I checked the office. The notebook remained in its drawer, undisturbed. I checked the black bag, the loop band with the chip still nested inside. I held the band to the light and watched the embedded filament catch it like a thread waiting to be pulled. I set it down and breathed evenly until my head stopped buzzing. Then I made a plan I could execute without help. I would not confront him. A conversation without leverage changes nothing. A conversation built on air collapses. I needed an external weight. I called the number on the sign at the storage facility, the law enforcement liaison. I described suspicious activity in a way that was factual and restrained. I offered my recordings. The voice on the other end thanked me and told me not to intervene. The word intervene sparked and burned out, leaving resolve behind. I returned to the storage unit that afternoon and installed a second camera inside my own unit, angled to catch the corridor from a different perspective. I calibrated motion detection to trigger at shin height. I placed a small strip of tape across the seam of the blue lock's door, a hairline marker a person inside would break without noticing. I told myself I was placing breadcrumbs I could later use to retrace the path between ignorance and decision. At home, I prepared dinner and moved through the kitchen in an order Ethan would approve. Cut, cook, clean, store. When he entered, I watched the micro pause his body made at the threshold, the kind of pause that checks a gauge. He ate with normal appetite. He asked about my day in a tone that made the question a structure rather than a curiosity. I fed it simple answers. He seemed pleased by simplicity. He slept easily. I did not. I waited for the moment his body woke with purpose. It came at 12:23 a.m. He dressed in that same precise silence. I stayed still until he laughed. Then I followed with the urgency of a person who knows the window will not stay open.
The facility gate accepted his code. It accepted mine a minute later. The corridor felt like an instrument ready to be played. Ethan approached the blue lock and stopped. The tape I had placed lay on the floor, snapped. He bent, picked it up, turned it between his fingers, then dropped it into his pocket. He unlocked the unit and rolled the door up halfway. He stood in the gap like a single tooth missing from a closed jaw. I filmed from hip level, my phone held close to my body. Inside, cases lined the wall like obedient dogs. He chose one and opened it. Small objects lay in rows inside, identical and uncannily clean. He lifted two and slid them into an inner pocket of his jacket. He checked his watch. He closed the case. He lifted another. He was building an order inside a disorder I had named logistics to save myself from naming it correctly. The corridor's far end clicked. The sneaker toes arrived. The bulky shoes followed. The warehouse air pressed in. Ethan passed one object, then another, then held the third back, weighing it again, brushing its edge with his thumb as if deciding whether it qualified. The man with the bulky shoes gestured with his chin, impatient in a way that ignored my existence by default because it didn't expect me. Ethan did not yield. He moved the third object back into the case, closed it, locked it, put the key in his pocket. A shift of power registered as a tiny tilt in the man's shoulders. The sneaker toes did not change angle. A camera somewhere hummed. A door beyond us opened, and the security guard's voice cut cleanly into the corridor. Not asking, not challenging, just announcing his presence with a cough and a keychain. The men moved like liquid into a shadow. Ethan stepped out and pulled the roll-up down. The blue lock clicked. The men dissolved down the other end, not fleeing, simply fading into the geometry that had been arranged for them.
The guard walked past, eyes forward, steps measured. He nodded at no one. He counted doors. Ethan waited until the guard turned the corner. Then he walked toward the exit with hands empty and head neutral. I tracked him to the lot and watched him hesitate at his car, as if the night had exceeded a limit he had set. He leaned against the roof and breathed. 2 short inhales, a long exhale, one hand pressing his pocket where the case key rested. I stood 10 feet away and let him feel a presence without identifying it. He turned and saw me. His eyes did not widen. He didn't start. He measured me like a variable he had expected to arrive eventually. I was not going to speak. Words would be a bridge I might not want to cross. I lifted my phone and showed him the recording, paused at the moment his gloved hand offered the first object. His mouth tightened by a molecule. He nodded as if recognizing a shape he had drawn earlier by accident. He understood the cost of a name. He understood what my silence meant. I walked past him to the security office and placed my phone on the counter. I showed the footage. I gave unit numbers, timestamps, plate numbers. The guard watched, then dialed, then asked me to wait in a small room with a vending machine. Waiting pressed on me from all sides, but I did not crack because I had traded fear for sequence. I texted our address to the liaison. I wrote one sentence. This is current. The clock above the soda machine moved in visible clicks. The corridor outside filled with new footsteps, heavier, practiced. Doors rolled and stayed rolled. Voices low and tense formed shapes in the air that did not reach me. The guard returned with a paper for my statement. I wrote the facts in straight lines. I did not look up when Ethan walked past the open office door with 2 officers, his hands visible, empty, steady. He did not look at me. He looked as if he had been expecting this outcome since the first moment he chose the other life. At home, the house was not a stage anymore. It was a container with something removed. The second drawer's notebook would become an exhibit. The black bag's loop would be weighed and matched to a reader. The car would sit silent until a decision was made about its future. The quiet held. The order we built did not crumble. It simply revealed the hidden compartments that had allowed it to stand. I took a breath and let the air move through me. I touched the table where he liked things square. I squared nothing. I stood exactly where I was and felt the floor carry me. I did not prepare a speech. I did not plan an explanation for neighbors or friends or anyone who thought they deserved one. My life had stretched into a new shape and found its edges. I went to the bedroom and lay down on my side of the bed, not to sleep, but to hold the line I had claimed between looking away and looking through. I waited until the sky shifted from black to the color that reveals outlines without lending them comfort. I sat up and wrote a list I would actually keep, not in my head, but on paper that could be held accountable. Call the liaison to confirm chain of evidence. Find a lawyer for myself, not because I had done anything wrong, but because clarity likes representation. Cancel the storage unit. Change the locks after the warrant was served. Box items for inventory. Request victims' services, even if the system thought that word didn't apply to me. It applied. I would claim it. I moved through the house and touched nothing except the pen, the paper, the chair I pulled out and pushed back in. The doorbell rang at 8. 2 agents stood with calm faces, and their calm steadied me. They asked me to sit. They asked for access to the office in the garage. I pointed, and they moved quietly, packing our order into evidence. I did not apologize for the mess that would follow. Mess was honest. I stayed at the table and watched a small square of light creep across the floor, measuring time more gently than any clock. I thought about the first moment I had chosen to follow rather than pretend. I thought about the corridor and the seam door and the wristband with its thread of access. I thought about the word I had kept pushed away, the one I refused to hold until the structure around it proved itself. I let it reach me now, not as a scream, but as a label that finally stuck. The people who had stood with Ethan in the corridor didn't move like delivery drivers. The cases didn't hold inventory with SKU codes. The notebook's confirmed custody did not refer to package tracking. It referred to human beings. The objects I had watched slide across a small metal table were not objects. They were tokens in a chain that treated people like items. The third one he had withheld was not an act of mercy. It was quality control. The logistics I had built to keep myself safe had masked a traffic I could no longer rename. That was the word I had avoided. Now it sat in front of me with the weight it deserved. It pinned me to the chair and then let me stand. The officers finished and left me with a card and instructions and a promise that investigations moved slower than a person wanted until they moved very fast. I did not want speed. I wanted completion. I walked to the office and stared at the empty drawer as if it would confess. It would not. It would only frame the absence. I closed it and set my palm on the wood until the shape of my hand warmed it. I took the list and folded it twice and placed it in my back pocket. I picked up my phone and checked the footage one last time to confirm I had done what I said I would do. Then I deleted it from the screen and let it live where it needed to live, in the case file, under numbers that would hold. I walked to the front door and opened it to the quiet street. I looked at the spot where his shoes always landed after work. I closed the door very gently so the frame would not rattle. I walked to the bedroom and stood where I had stood the night I decided looking away would not save me. I didn't cry, not because I'm strong, not because I'm numb, but because my body chose action over release. I chose it too. The choice sat with me and did not move. I carried it to the sink and rinsed a cup. I carried it to the trash and tied the bag. I carried it to the porch and set it down for pickup. I carried it back inside and let it perch on my shoulder like a quiet bird with heavy bones. It would fly when it wanted. Until then, I would not disturb it.
The facility gate accepted his code. It accepted mine a minute later. The corridor felt like an instrument ready to be played. Ethan approached the blue lock and stopped. The tape I had placed lay on the floor, snapped. He bent, picked it up, turned it between his fingers, then dropped it into his pocket. He unlocked the unit and rolled the door up halfway. He stood in the gap like a single tooth missing from a closed jaw. I filmed from hip level, my phone held close to my body. Inside, cases lined the wall like obedient dogs. He chose one and opened it. Small objects lay in rows inside, identical and uncannily clean. He lifted two and slid them into an inner pocket of his jacket. He checked his watch. He closed the case. He lifted another. He was building an order inside a disorder I had named logistics to save myself from naming it correctly. The corridor's far end clicked. The sneaker toes arrived. The bulky shoes followed. The warehouse air pressed in. Ethan passed one object, then another, then held the third back, weighing it again, brushing its edge with his thumb as if deciding whether it qualified. The man with the bulky shoes gestured with his chin, impatient in a way that ignored my existence by default because it didn't expect me. Ethan did not yield. He moved the third object back into the case, closed it, locked it, put the key in his pocket. A shift of power registered as a tiny tilt in the man's shoulders. The sneaker toes did not change angle. A camera somewhere hummed. A door beyond us opened, and the security guard's voice cut cleanly into the corridor. Not asking, not challenging, just announcing his presence with a cough and a keychain. The men moved like liquid into a shadow. Ethan stepped out and pulled the roll-up down. The blue lock clicked. The men dissolved down the other end, not fleeing, simply fading into the geometry that had been arranged for them. The guard walked past, eyes forward, steps measured. He nodded at no one. He counted doors. At night now, I still wake at 12:17 and listen. The house breathes differently. It does not hold its breath. I walk the hallway and find it neutral. I look at the shelf where the black bag sat and find only dust.
I think about the shape of silence that used to hover there and how silence can pretend to be peace until you touch it. I think about the list that is no longer in my head, but in the world, converted into statements and evidence and a case file with my name on the second page. I return to bed and lie on my side, facing the door. I do not count my heartbeats. I do not rehearse what I will do if the garage opens. The garage stays closed. I let my eyelids fall. I hold the line. Closing line. I am not waiting for him to come home. I am staying to keep the door open for the truth that walked in behind him and refused to leave.